Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Melanin Margin, the weekly chat show where conversations about race are never off the table. We're your hosts, Quaviondre Williams.
And Daquon Wilson.
So let's get into this week's conversation. What's hot on the table this week?
In an article on CNN written by Stephen Collinson, we learned that Senator Mitch McConnell's frozen moment renews questions about America's aged leaders. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell's words dried up and he froze, standing silent and staring straight ahead for around 30 painful seconds in the middle of a press conference Wednesday, the second time he had endured such an uncomfortable on camera ordeal since July. His misfortune immediately revived questions about his health and age, especially since he suffered a concussion in a fall earlier this year. His office insisted Wednesday that the veteran senator had simply been feeling, quote unquote, momentarily lightheaded. The issue of whether someone is too old to serve is a discomforting one since it involves discussing private health issues and mortality. An Associated Press survey released this week found that 77% of Americans think Biden is too old to be effective for 4 more years. Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, for instance, is proposing a mental competency test for politicians over the age of 75 as she beseeches Americans in her GOP primary campaign to embrace a new generation of leadership. Yet the age of some key leaders does beg the question whether their refusal to ride into the sunset is thwarting the rise of a new generation of politicians, or whether younger figures in both parties lack the talent and the drive to push them aside. So let's start the conversation there, Andre. Do you think that the refusal of older generations is stopping the rise of younger politicians in office, or are there just not enough young people getting into politics?
I do think that the older generation is definitely trying to stop the next generation of politicians from coming into office because many of those in the old guard, so to speak, fear the new or the unknown. This is hardly a surprise given the pattern of progress throughout the generations. Society as a whole is a metaphorical creature of habit. It likes routine because routine is familiar. It's what it's used to. It's the known. Any progress that has been made over the course of society has hardly, if ever, been met with open arms. It's been a constant battle to make progress and maintain it because when we look at the older generation of people in power, oftentimes they want to keep things exactly the way they've always been. This is because they consider the old way to be the safest, most reasonable lifestyle because it's the lifestyle that they've grown accustomed to, the world that they were raised in. And changing that world or bringing in a new perspective forces those in the older generation to look at their past with clear eyes and not through the rose-colored nostalgic lenses that we can sometimes remember our past to be. Many older people don't like being confronted with the reality that things change. Ideas continue evolving and the world keeps moving forward because they are afraid that this will somehow render them obsolete in the new world the next generation creates. But sometimes it's more insidious than that. Sometimes the real fear of the older generation, particularly those with privilege, is that many of them are accustomed to the benefits that oppression has granted them. They want to maintain the isms so that both themselves and their family line can continue retaining all the power they've held. To make matters worse, because of how embedded the isms are in the very fabric of our nations, even those who are oppressed by them still wish to uphold them. Excuse me, Clarence Thomas. Oh, I'm so sorry. Excuse me, Daquon.
You can say that again.
I was
We don't know.
it was a cough, Daquon. I don't know where that cough came up. Excuse me, y'all. But they wish to uphold them not because they benefit from it, but because it's their routine. They've been forced to build their life, shape their personalities, raise their families to work within these isms. And for that to change would challenge the very core of their being, which is a challenge that very few people in the older generation can get up to face, because every time we try to push the needle forward, unlearn and dismantle the isms, there are those in the older generation who push back twice as hard to keep those isms in place. So yes, I do think that the older generation is fighting with everything in their power to stop the younger generation from taking political power, just as the next generation will fight the one following it, and so on and so forth. As much as we would all like to think that change or progress is made simply through peaceful conversations and thought-provoking discussions, in our society, that is very rarely the case. More often than not, the next generation has to take a stand and fight against the old powers in place and force the needle forward. It's just the way it's always been, and likely the way it always will be. There are plenty of young politicians trying to take office, but again, the old guard is trying to keep them out. But they can bar the windows, lock the doors all they like. We'll bulldoze our way through one way or another. So they can either get on board or stay the fuck out of the way, because progress is going to fucking happen, whether they like it or not. But Daquon, I'm gonna pass it back to you. What do you think?
I think that, of course, this is a situation where a lot of things are happening.
Yeah.
I think that there we have to realize the state of politics that young people would be getting into in the first place. I mean, politics right now are as divided as it's ever been. Everything is a controversial issue. There's no middle ground anymore. There are very polarized opinions. And so it can be really hard to get into politics. Not to mention, we of course know that the younger generation has been burdened more with student loan debt, for instance. There's been a stagnation with wages, inflation has been going up. And you have all of those financial factors compiling on the younger generation who would get into politics,
Yeah.
but feasibly and fiscally cannot. Because we know, incumbents, especially those older incumbents, have huge pockets of donors slapping so much money into their campaigns that it is a mountain to try to unseat an incumbent. And also, we hear stories, for example, Representative Maxwell Frost, who is one of the only Gen Zers in office right now at that level, who talked about how hard it was for him just to afford housing in DC. So there are so many issues that are discouraging a lot of young people from getting into politics. But we also know that there are also a lot of young people who definitely have the talent, who definitely have the drive, who definitely have that passion to make things work. And what really happens, like you said before, is the old guard not relinquishing power to the new guard, pushing back against the new guard, in fact, because we know politics is a numbers game. So there are so many times when there are politicians who would rather keep their seats versus retiring and potentially giving it up a seat for their team, rather than thinking about who can really do the job the best and do the job most effectively. And so it's really sad to see that a lot of these older generation of politicians just are latching onto power and don't want to give it up. But it's not surprising, because that comes with the nature of power. When people have power, they don't want to give it up. They want to still be the ones making the decisions, because at the end of the day, so many politicians, despite what they say, are in it for themselves. They're not in it for the best interest of their constituents. They're not in it to have this grand view of what the world can be. They want to keep their power. They want to line their pockets. They want to make sure that they are good and their family is good, and generations after them will still be good because
Hmm.
they had the power to control what our society does and how we move forward or backwards, as unfortunately often it is as a society.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's also that conversation about people thinking about age limits for these
Mhm.
politicians. And, I don't know about age limits because that can teeter on the line of ageism.
Right.
However, I am a firm believer in the fact that there should be term limits for every position of political power in our society, specifically those appointed to the Supreme Court. A Supreme Court member should not have a lifetime appointment. Point blank, period.
Period.
I've done some research onto why members of the Supreme Court are appointed for a lifetime, and Kevin Wagner from the Palm Beach Post says that, quote, the primary reason is to remove them from political pressures. This is intended to help ensure that decisions they make are guided by law and judgment rather than trying to placate political interests to save their jobs, end quote. Now, theoretically speaking, that does seem like a good idea because you don't want people voted in who will sway the law in favor of whoever's political agenda had the deepest pockets for their campaign. However, the problem is a lifetime appointment isn't the solution to that issue. The reason that this is because it fails to take into account that people by design are moved by our own personal biases, beliefs, and prejudices. It's the reason why laws are always changing, why religious texts are always debated, and why language continues to evolve. We're not machines. We are thinking, feeling beings, and those feelings and thoughts shape who we are and what we do and how we interpret the world around us. It's why people can go through the same situation and have completely different experiences of it because we all see the world through our own biased lenses. Not to mention that some of the members who are appointed were appointed with the express purpose of overturning laws that directly benefit a particular, political party or a religious agenda. Impartiality when it comes to the interpretation or reviewing of law is not entirely possible, as evident by the fact that several laws that were deemed constitutional at one point in time have now been overturned at a different point in time. Sometimes in really positive ways, like desegregation, the right to marry being expanded to include LGBTQIA persons and interracial relationships, as well as making discrimination unlawful. And sometimes in negative ways, like the overturning of Roe v. Wade and ending affirmative action. Supreme Court justices are moved by the political climate of the world around them in the same way that the average everyday person is. To believe otherwise is to ignore the fact that throughout several lifetimes, we've seen just how much laws are changed based on the views of the world we live in. All that a lifetime appointment ensures is that members of the Supreme Court are able to continue imposing their personal beliefs into laws of our ever evolving society. But what do you think about that, Daquon? Do you believe that there should be an age limit on politicians?
I do not. I agree with you that I don't necessarily believe in age limits, but rather term limits.
Hmm.
I think that age limits, like you say, can lean deeply into ageism as well as ableism, because when we think about what is an appropriate age limit, what are the metrics that we are going by? Are we going by physical capabilities, which in that instance could limit the people who have a physical disability, even if they are within the age limit? Are we going by mental capabilities? Once again, that could render anybody who has some type of mental disability ineligible, even if they are within that age limit. And even so, not only how are we creating these metrics, but what person is creating the metrics or the test for the metrics? For example, Nikki Haley's mental proficiency test. Who is creating that test? Because we know that this country has a long history with creating different barriers using tests to limit access to power. And this could be a test that could specifically rule out anybody with not only disabilities, but people from lower income backgrounds, people who might not be as educated from a collegiate level or law degrees, et cetera, et cetera. And so, in essence, there really is no good way to create an age limit that doesn't, in consequence, disenfranchise a group of people. And I also wanted to speak on your topic of the Supreme Court because
Hmm.
that is a very interesting topic because we know that the Supreme Court have these lifetime appointments and it's supposed to be impartial. But the reality is it's not. It's not impartial at all. Not only do people have individual biases that are internal to them and just implicit as a human being, everybody has some type of bias. We have to work through our biases, but everybody is going to have that initial bias. But we also know that there are Supreme Court justices that have been, in their city girl era getting flued out and
Daquon.
and
Not that
it's
city girl era.
the city girl era and it's political bribery in essence. And so we still have Supreme Court justices who are pressured by politics to make certain decisions, even if it's not outside politicians, it's their own politics that are pressuring them into making certain decisions and not being completely impartial when it comes to law. And I think that there's also the element of power and who we are giving power to. Because when we give the Supreme Court this power to overturn laws and do X, Y, and Z, and they can do it for their entire lifetime, that is a lot of power. And who's to say that the Supreme Courts and the people of the United States are always going to be in agreement? Because last I checked that this country was founded for the people. It's
Hmm.
supposed to be a democracy and people's voices are supposed to matter. So
Hmm.
when we have decisions like Roe v. Wade and all of the recent Supreme Court decisions that have been causing so much controversy,
Especially with the overwhelming majority of Americans disagreeing with the decision.
right? It really begs the question, are we a country for the people? Are we actually able to have our voices be heard and get the representation we deserve when anything that we say we want can just get overturned by a Supreme Court because they say, no, I don't like that law. Get it out the books.
Exactly. In an article from NBC News written by Angela Yang, we learned that Illinois passed the country's first law protecting child influencers last week. Illinois' new law set to take effect next July mirrors California's Coogan Act, which was passed in 1939 to protect the earnings of child performers and has inspired similar laws in other states. Content creators in Illinois must set aside a portion of any earnings from videos, including the likeness, name, or photograph of the minor in a trust for them to access upon adulthood, according to the law. The percentage of earnings allocated is based on how heavily that minor is featured in the content, including in stories told about them without necessarily showing their image. Creators who fail to meet this criteria can be sued for damages, but the bill does not provide a government enforcement mechanism, meaning compliance and legal action is left up to individual families. High school student Shreya Nalamathu, whom State Senator David Kohler credits with coming up with the idea behind the legislation, said she's pleasantly surprised at how quickly the bill moved through the legislature since it was introduced this February. She said, quote, I know that it's not 100% perfect, and I wasn't expecting that it was going to do it, but I didn't want an obsession with it being perfect to stop real progress being made, because this is the first step, and I'm just excited to see child influencing being legitimized and on the books, end quote. So, Daquon, I wanted to ask you, do you think that there should be wider protections for child influencers?
Absolutely. I think that influencing is this kind of wild west right now. It's relatively new. It's been growing so much in the past decade. And so now is the time to really look at it, create legislation to make sure that there is not exploitation in this industry, which unfortunately we know happens a lot. I think that as somebody that creates videos online, when you are putting out videos, even if you're not the one editing it, even if you're just kind of in the background of a video, it requires a lot of vulnerability. And I don't think that that is something that is talked about enough. You are showing your life to millions of people potentially, letting them see the inner workings of your household, letting them understand what you go through on a semi daily basis, especially with a lot of these like family vloggers and daily vlogger channels. So that can open up a lot of discourse that most people don't have to deal with. You don't have millions of people commenting on how you live your life. And so, especially for someone who is young and impressionable, that can be a lot. And we need to make sure that these children influencers are given protections to make sure that they're not only mentally sound, but also financially sound. Because we know that influencing has become a very lucrative career for many. And so you have families who are making millions of dollars, if not more, off of these kind of family style videos and videos about their children, even if the children are not present. So these children are essentially actors. They are actors in this family vlog show. And like child actors, there needs to be protections for them financially to make sure that they're not being exploited by their families, because it's a lot of work that goes into it. Not only the vulnerability, but there are also so many minors who are running their own channels, who are creating videos, who are editing videos themselves, who are doing a lot of work when it comes to what needs to be done to create a successful production. And they deserve to be compensated for their time. So I absolutely believe that there needs to be wider protections for children. But I'll pass the question back to you, Andre.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. I think that these protections are long overdue, considering how long family vloggers have been using their children to curate content since the very start of YouTube and social media sharing sites. I think a lot of the reasons why these protections have taken so long to come into these lawmaking conversations is because for so many years, we as a society devalued content creation as a legitimate business venture. It was always brushed aside as some silly thing that people did and that there was no real money in the industry. And, maybe at one point in time, content creation for sites like TikTok and YouTube and Instagram and other social media sites may not have been particularly lucrative. But we found out quite rapidly that content creators and influencers have entered the same level of fame, financial success, and recognition as traditional celebrities. One promotional post or product launch from some of these influencers could literally propel a business from the red into the black or sell out their entire stock in a matter of days, even hours. And the unfortunate reality is that in every industry, the exploitation of unpaid labor will always find a way into those spaces. It's just the way of capitalism. There are abusive content creators out there who have had children for the sole purpose of creating a new revenue stream for their content. They'll document their children's entire lives, film them crying, being punished, pranking them, all for the sake of dollar signs. There are countless stories of children who have grown up in these types of environments where they have begged their parents not to film them or just simply didn't want to participate, and their parents not only ignored their request but forced them to continue doing it. And in those situations, these children very rarely see a penny of that revenue that their parents have made using their likeness, personality, and actions. And even sadder than that, like you just said too, Daquon, not every person can or wants to handle the spotlight. Being a person in the public eye, whether that be as a traditional celebrity or as a content creator, is not an easy path. It's one filled with a lot of doubt, uncontrollable variables, and a level of scrutiny from the public eye that can destroy a person's self worth. It can be a vicious industry that will eat you alive if you haven't come prepared with your, fighting gloves. Now, while I'm sure that there are certain people like myself and probably like Daquon who have always dreamed of being, an actor or a writer or performer when they were growing up, and that simply is not the dream everyone has. Some people are happy with having a practical career, not being accosted by fans day in and day out, and living out a simple, normal life. And those dreams are just as valid as the ones that are filled with glitz and glam, and they should be respected as well. I think it's the job of every parent to listen to their child when they tell them that they are uncomfortable with something, and to let their child have a voice when it comes to the dreams they have for their lives. More than that, though, I personally believe that until your child can vocalize and fully understand what it means to be in the public eye, I don't think they should be made to participate. Yes, they may have to accompany their parents in their ventures and such like that, but I still think that it's the parents' job to keep their child as protected as possible in those spaces so that their child can decide for themselves whether or not this is the life they want. But Daquon, this brings up an interesting question too. I wanted to know, what are your thoughts in general on family vloggers who put their children in their content? Do you think that the practice itself is generally, wholesome, or is it exploitative always?
I used to be somebody that was pretty neutral, kind of leaning positive towards family vloggers and family channels. But I've realized that as I've gotten older, I've gotten more jaded on that type of content because I realize just how exploitative it is on a basic level. Like you said before, these children are being shoved a camera in their face at such young ages where a lot of them can't really vocalize that, hey, I don't want to be on camera, or hey, I don't want to be a part of this in any way. Because let's be real, these are children. They're going to do what their parents say because they are the parents. And so there can be a lot of pressure put onto these children, especially if it's a family where the content is their source of income. It's like, if we don't have content, we can't put food on the table. And that's a huge burden for a child to bear, to be like, I have to do this so that my family can eat and survive and have all these nice things. And I also think that there's the aspect of a lot of times you don't really know what goes into something until you're older. It's like it's frustrating when you're a child, and it's like you'll know when you get older. You'll understand when you get older, and it's like, no, I can totally understand. I'm not like stupid or anything. And you realize, oh, when you get older, there is a lot that changes. You know, your brain develops, and when them chemicals start balancing, it's like, all right, like there's a lot that I didn't realize. And so as a child, it may seem so great to have this kind of glamorous lifestyle. You have a nice house, you get recognized, you're basically a celebrity. And a lot of children, that is something that they want because they only see the positives of it. They only see all of the good parts of it. And
Hmm.
so after they get into this lifestyle or this career path, then they're like, "Oh, there's a lot of things that aren't as glamorous
Yeah.
as it seems."
Yeah.
It's like I can't go to Walmart without getting recognized. I have all of these people commenting on my appearance, my body, XYZ. And there's also the unfortunate aspect that a lot of child focused content is just opening the door for all different types of predators and groomers and all different types of people like that to have access to that content and almost get access to that child. Sometimes actually get access to that child. So I nowadays lean more towards that child content and family content in general is pretty exploitative most of the times. There can be some cute and wholesome moments, sure, but at the end of the day, it's really hard for a child to make an informed decision and a unbiased decision on whether they want to be a part of this content conglomerate of a family plan. So it's a really sticky situation because even if they say they want it, are they saying it because of the pressure? Are they
Yeah.
saying it because they only see the positives? It's a mixed bag. So that's why I lean more exploitative.
Yeah, I mean, luckily for me, I wasn't brought up in a family that was in the spotlight. But one of the things I appreciated about how my mother raised me was that she tried her best not to push her ideas of what she wanted my career path to be onto me. I was able to come into acting and writing organically because my mother gave me this space to explore those ventures on my own. From there, I was able to discover the ups and the downs of being in a creative career path over time and was able to decide for myself what I wanted to do with my life. Now, I don't think that all family vloggers are bad. I do think that there may be some performers who just happen to be born in a family where they are able to get a head start, you know? Like, had I been born in a family of established actors or performers, I may have been able to get way further ahead in my acting and writing career than I am now, simply due to the volume of opportunities that would be available to me because of who my parents are. And I do believe that there are some parents who do use a percentage of the money they make with their children to invest it back into their children's futures, via college funds and trusts or savings. Now, even though I don't believe that family vloggers are inherently exploitative, I think that for some families, vlogs have the potential to be a very wholesome way for them to bond and have fun together. However, we just can't ignore the fact that there is just as much potential for it to be dangerously exploitative and abusive, which is why there needs to be laws protecting children in these situations. We'd love to believe that every parent of every child has the best interests of their child at heart. In an imperfect world, that would be ideal. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world where children are among the most vulnerable class of people when it comes to laws governing and protecting them. For every loving and careful mommy or daddy blogger looking to set their child up for success, there is also a narcissistic, abusive one using their child to create a comfortable life for themselves alone. For every thoughtful and caring family channel where everyone is having a good time, there is also the family that has forced their children to be nothing more than another tool to bring them money and success. There is always the other side of the metaphorical coin, which is why we should always stay vigilant in protecting the voices of the voiceless. Because pretending bad people don't exist, doesn't stop them from doing bad things to others. You know what I mean, Daquon?
Yeah, I totally agree. We have to make sure that we are being proactive
Yes,
so
that's a
that we
great
are not
word. Yeah.
reacting to so many situations, because we've seen family vlog channels, they go down that pipeline of family vlogs, they
Mm-hmm.
take the turn onto pranks, those pranks become abuse, and it
Mm-hmm.
traumatizes the children. There are so many child actors and child vloggers and child
Coming out, talking about,
influencers.
telling their stories. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Or, I mean, even just some of the kids doing like reaction videos and stuff like that. There's so much that they went through behind the scenes that now we get to see because they're able to speak their truth without being under those pressures of their family or whoever is creating that channel. And so it's something that we just need to get ahead of. In
Yeah.
fact, we're already behind it. We need to do more
Exactly.
to
We need to
catch
catch up.
up.
Yeah. But I do love what you said, though, the idea of being proactive instead of reactive. It shouldn't take these stories coming out for people to have recognized that, oh, there is a danger in letting children basically working unpaid labor. And I think that even
Right.
when we talked about this a little bit before with like AI, it's like we need to
Mhm.
be proactive now before it starts to become dangerous, because we already know there's a potential for danger in AI. And the fact that we haven't been proactive in trying to create those protections now opens the door for a lot of dangerous situations to come up in the future. So I fully agree with that. I think that we need to stop being so reactive in our lawmaking and more proactive in trying to protect people.
Period. In an article from the Associated Press written by Juan Lozano, we learn that Texas has taken over Houston's public school district, raising back to school anxiety for Houston students, parents, and teachers. The new state installed superintendent Mike Miles has restructured 28 underperforming schools, many of which are located in lower income neighborhoods. Their teachers must now follow a centrally scripted curriculum with in classroom cameras monitoring their performance and pay based largely on standardized test scores. Miles also has disbanded a team that supported students with autism, although his staff says special education services will continue as part of a restructuring, and filled some vacancies with uncertified teachers. His most criticized change is transforming libraries at dozens of underperforming schools into discipline centers where students will get extra help and where those who misbehave will be disciplined, watching lessons on Zoom rather than disrupting their classrooms. Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner says the library's plan is creating a prison like atmosphere in spaces usually associated with learning. One veteran secondary teacher who asked that her name not be used for fear of losing their job told the Associated Press that many of her colleagues are concerned Miles's system of tightly timed and controlled class instruction will turn teaching into assembly line work. Miles has brushed off the criticism, saying most parents, teachers, and students support his plans, allegedly. Andre, I wanted to ask you though,
Mhm.
how do you think the reformed initiatives under Miles's education system might impact the education outcomes for Black, Latino, and low income students in the Houston school districts?
Before I answer this question, I just wanted to say, what the fuck is going on, y'all? Like,
Right?
seriously, what the fuck is happening? This shit going on in our society is getting really fucking scary, really fucking
Wild.
fast, Daquon. Like, so I'm gonna need whatever the hell is in the air to go ahead and clock out for me, because this shit right here is sounding like a plot from like some YA dystopian novel, and I am not
Is
here
this
for it.
divergent?
That's right. But no, back to the question. This will 100% negatively impact the education outcomes for Black, Latino, and low-income students in the Houston School District, because these reform initiatives aren't treating these students as children. They're treating them like criminals. Not to mention how basing the pay of the teachers on the scores of standardized tests will totally shift how these teachers teach, but also how they go about disciplining the students in their classrooms. Instead of curating an ideal environment for learning by having these teachers be paid a livable wage and giving them the necessary resources to give their students the best learning tools available, they've created even more job insecurity among these teachers. We all know that many teachers are underpaid to start with. So most of the reason they follow this career path is because they have a passion for it. They were already struggling to make ends meet with the low pay and lack of resources provided to them by their districts. But to make their pay dependent upon their students' test scores while doing nothing to make their job easier is going to have massive consequences. And let me tell you how I think this is going to go. For the teachers who do decide to stay, because they are being forced to follow a centrally scripted curriculum that they are now being monitored on to ensure they are following it to a T, there will be no room for them to explore different avenues in communicating the information to their students who may not be able to learn in the traditional way, which will mean that these teachers will have to use the grades of their quizzes and homework to determine who in the class is grasping the concepts and who is not. Now, if they know for a fact that certain students just aren't grasping the information, come time for those standardized tests, those students' scores could determine whether or not that teacher gets a pay cut or a pay raise. And depending on the character of the teacher, they could manufacture reasons to dismiss low-performing students from their classes in order to protect their class average, which would mean that these students would be labeled as problem children when their only problem was that they learned differently from others. This could create an environment for that child to lose their self-worth or get involved in the wrong crowd simply because they were never given the chance or opportunity to reach their fullest potential. It would be the whole the self-fulfilling prophecy theory, where if the people around a person treat them as if they are a problem, then eventually they may start to believe it and become a problem. So I think that this whole thing is a very dangerous way to approach education. And I think it will do a lot more harm than good. But Daquon, I really, really want to hear what your take is on this, bitch.
Size and former educator. I am absolutely appalled by these reforms and changes that are going on in the Houston Public School District. It is, as somebody that, has a little bit of experience in the past being in a classroom teaching, it is absurd what they're doing. I fully believe that these people making the changes don't really understand how to run a school. They know how to run a business. And when I saw that Miles has a charter school background, I was like, okay, it makes sense because there are a lot of charter schools that are run just like businesses. And that's not how education happens. That's not how learning happens. And so, one of my biggest problems with this is that it does nothing to really address the issues that are going on. You are turning libraries into detention centers, basically. You are getting rid of librarians and making it to where children just have to find the books on their own. And it's like we live in a society where reading scores are dropping. The pandemic has affected so many students. There are so many students in this school district who are reading well below grade level. And a lot of students just don't like to read. And you are getting rid of the one mechanism that could install a love and appreciation for reading. Because let's be real, there are a lot of librarians who work magic when it comes to working with students. It could be one librarian that gives you a book recommendation that you fall in love with, gives you a book where you see yourself represented, which we know Texas doesn't like to see representation in their books, but that's a different conversation for a different day. We'll get to that sometime. But there is just so many problems with that. Not only the detention center of libraries, but also the centrally scripted curriculum. Like, what are we doing here? Anybody who has been in a classroom knows you can script and plan to the nines. You can script down to the second what you're going to say and what you're going to do in your classroom. The reality is, you are never going to follow that script. You are never going to go exactly as planned. That assignment that you think takes 20 minutes really takes 45 minutes. That assignment that you think takes an hour is going to take 2 days. So it really creates a system where students can't learn. They are just being pushed and pushed and pushed through a curriculum and tossed into a standardized test. That is not how students learn. That is not going to make these changes that and reforms that Miles alleges is going to happen. Because what's going to happen, like you said, it's like you said, Andre, is there are going to be a lot of students that fall behind. And because of how the curriculum is structured, there's not going to be time for the teachers to catch up these students. There's not going to be time for teachers to really check in with students in the classroom to figure out how they're doing, to be able to pivot and adjust and be like, all right, they're not understanding this while I'm explaining it like this. Let me take a pause, think of another way, another lesson, another form of engagement that will really help them to understand the concept. That's not going to be happening under this education system. So what you are doing is essentially telling these Black, Latino, and low-income students that we don't care about you. We only care about if you can perform well on a test, which again, standardized testing is not the way to go, has never been the way to go, has for decades shown so many problems, not only with how these tests are constructed, but the racist history behind a lot of standardized testing and testing systems. So let me calm down. Let me take a breath.
No, go off, bitch. Go off.
I just think that this is something that is such a problem, and we are not doing anything for the students who really need help. I mean, let's be honest, they got rid of teachers who worked with special education students and was like, we'll just throw a couple uncertified teachers there. They'll be able to do the gig. These misbehaving students, we're not actually going to really check on them. We're going to throw them in this detention room. They can look on Zoom. and get whatever they need. And it's like, do you really think that this is going to be effective? Do you really think that this is going to be effective? This goes to a problem that a lot of charter schools have. I'm not going to name names, but a lot of charter schools only care about the appearance. They want everything to run like clockwork. They want students to be
Yep.
well behaved in their seats. If they're not well behaved, they will get pushed to a different room, out of view, or kicked out in general. They want lessons to run exactly as planned so that they can be like, look at how smooth the learning process is going. But in reality, it's only looking like learning is happening. The reality is those students aren't learning. So this is going to have so many negative repercussions on some of the most vulnerable populations when it comes to education in this country. And it's so sad. And I think that we also need to recognize that this all of these changes is coming at a time where there have been improvements in the district, but the state, Texas, is like, I don't care. We're going to do what we want to. Because unfortunately, education has become this huge political issue, and these state legislatures want to make sure they control what is happening in these schools. And it's so problematic, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think, and I also think that, the first step in education reform is to prioritize the needs and well-being of students, and in order to do that, you have to start at the root, which is
Right.
the teachers. Teachers should not have to beg parents for classroom supplies, nor should they have to work another job to make ends meet. Teachers are a vital part of the education system. And while they may not be doing it solely for the money, people have fucking bills to pay. I've heard stories of teachers who said that they loved teaching and they would have been content doing it for the rest of their lives if the pay was better. But because they had to come out of their own pockets for basic classroom supplies, as well as not receiving any support from their district or their school, they had to leave the profession entirely. And for those who stay, not all of them have a passion for it, or, they aren't making enough to give 110% because they're barely making enough to give 50%. You know what I mean? So, now this doesn't excuse teachers who treat their students poorly. But what I am saying is that you can't be mad at some teachers who choose not to go above and beyond because they are essentially working their wage. When you pay people fairly, they tend to do more because they feel appreciated. And when that happens, it has ripples everywhere. If the teachers are paid fairly, they don't have that stress about finances. That would give them time to focus more on finding new innovative ways to teach their students. When learning is fun and engaging for students, they retain information better, which translates directly into better test scores. If these policymakers were really focused on making schools better for children, they would start with properly funding these schools, ensuring these teachers have access to classroom supplies and learning resources that they can share with their students. It seems like lawmakers keep missing the point every fucking time we bring up the conversation of why education is struggling in so many areas. The reason there is a teacher shortage is because you're not paying those who have aspirations of teaching a fair and livable wage. The reason students are struggling is because these teachers don't have access to learning tools that can make it easier for certain students students to learn the curriculum. And the reason many of these schools are underperforming is because they are understaffed, the teachers are overworked, and their students are given less and less opportunities to excel in these low-income neighborhoods. As someone who has been in both poorly funded schools as well as well-funded schools in my life, I make no exaggeration when I tell you that you can feel the difference in the learning environment the moment you step in. And while I may have been an honor roll student growing up, it was significantly more difficult to learn in the poorly funded schools I attended than in the well-funded ones. And the only reason I was able to maintain that honor roll was because I had a good support system at home. But what about the students who have terrible home lives in addition to going to poorly funded schools? Or what about the students in these poorly funded schools who couldn't learn in the traditional way and needed after school tutoring or better learning software to comprehend the information they were being taught? What about them? Turning a school into what is essentially a prison practice run doesn't breed a better tomorrow. It just creates yet another challenge for students to overcome in order to excel in their studies. But I mean, what do you think, Daquon? How can education policymakers learn from this situation to ensure that reforms prioritize students' needs and well-being?
I think that education policymakers should listen to the people who are on the ground. They should be listening to the parents. They should be listening to the students. They should be listening to the teachers. All of the key playmakers in the system of education, because they are the ones that should be the focus, not on you and how you want to achieve these goals to pad your resume and look nice and yada, yada, yada. Your achievements doesn't matter. Your ego as a superintendent doesn't matter. What's important, what is most important, is making sure that students have a safe and welcoming environment where they can learn and love learning. It is asinine thinking about these decisions that are being made, because frankly, these aren't decisions that are being made with the students' well-being in mind.
Yeah.
Like even thinking about the one teacher who spoke up and wanted to be anonymous because
Yeah.
she was in
Afraid
fear
of
that
losing her
she could be
job. Yeah.
fired.
Mm-hmm.
How can you have an education system where teachers are afraid to speak up in fear of retaliation and losing their job? It just does not work. So we need to make sure that we are prioritizing students and getting to the root of the cause. We won't have to turn libraries into detention centers if we actually focus on what it is that is making students misbehave, quote unquote. This can be a lot of different things. And we also know that sadly, a lot of misbehaving also comes with racial undertones. There are a lot of
Exactly.
teachers that don't understand the cultural nuances of their students and therefore misinterpret their actions and behaviors as being more aggressive or misbehaving, when in reality, if they understood where that student came from, they would know that that behavior, that action has nothing to do with trying to disrespect the teacher, has nothing to do with trying to cause a problem and misbehave in the classroom, and all to do about their culture and where they come from. So we need to stop doing all of this rigmarole of just the politics of performance.
Not rigmarole.
Rigmarole, bro. I have
The
to bring back
rigomoris, girl. Rigomoris.
rigomoris. You know, they don't understand our language, so we got to bring rigmarole back. But we need to stop playing this performance and really get down to the issues. Like you said, there is no reason a teacher should be teaching by day and Uber driver by night simply to make ends meet. We should be paying our teachers a fair and livable wage, because let's think about all of the most important people in our society, all of the most successful people in our society. The thing that unites them all is all of them had a teacher in some way. The work that teachers do is not replaceable. The work that they do is not something that you can just throw anybody at, give them a script, and be like, all right, you good. Like, that doesn't happen. And even speaking to somebody where when I first started to get into education, I didn't have teaching, or I didn't have a bachelor's degree in education. I didn't have a teaching licensure. I was one of those people that was swept into this system because they're like, we need teachers. So we're going to go to all of these top performing schools and be like, you're a good student, so you can obviously be a good teacher. And the reality is that isn't the case. It is so hard to enter education now, especially, but when you don't have a structure of supports and a structure that prioritizes the needs of the students and teachers of that school,
Mm-hmm.
you are essentially set up and destined to fail. And when you fail, they are going to look at you and be like, what happened? Because for one instance that they can see, somebody else succeeded, but they didn't have the same classroom you did. They didn't have the same students you did. They didn't have the same life experiences you did, or the same life struggles that you do. And so we have to stop acting like education can be this one size fits all thing. Every person
Yes, yes,
learns differently. Every
exactly.
person needs a different amount of structure and support. And so we need to focus on making sure that we are counting for these differences rather than creating this one size fits all system and
Yes.
forcing everybody to fit into it. Now, the table is always hot with current events and social issues, but sometimes the heat can get a little intense. Let's turn the temp down, take a breather, and get into this week's topic cool down. Andre, what do you have for us this week?
Well, Daquan, I wanted to ask you, have you ever made what you thought was a wrong choice, but it turned out to be the right choice?
Mm, no.
Next question.
Question. That's a question. I'm always right, and I always know that I'm right because I'm a Capricorn. But no, seriously, um, yes, there have been instances in my life where I have made a decision, was like, oh, maybe this is the wrong decision, but it really turned out to be for the best. I think one of them was college in general. I, I enjoyed my college time so much, but I thought that, you know, maybe my school isn't actually the school for me,
Mm,
especially when I first got there, because I suffered from what's it called? Big fish, little pond, or little
mm,
fish, big pond syndrome, where it was like at my high school, I was it. I was the person. I knew what I needed to do. I did what I needed to do. And like I achieved well. But then when you go to a school where everybody achieved well, you
mm-hmm.
start to realize that and feel like, am I inadequate? Is this not what I was supposed to do? Should I have gone to a different school where I would have done something different and maybe had
Like
an
imposter
easier time?
syndrome?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
exactly that. And so at the moment, I thought it was the wrong decision.
Mm-hmm.
But as I, stuck with it, I realized that this was the decision that I needed to make. It was the right decision. I met so many great people. I had so many great opportunities and experiences that I wouldn't have had elsewhere. And I really got a world class education. I mean, even thinking about majors, I remember trying to think about what major I wanted to do. First, I was like, okay, I'm going to be African American Studies and Political Science. Then I was like, no, I'm going to be AFAM and creative writing, and went through so many different decisions on what my final major would be. And I ended up just finalizing on African American Studies
Mm-hmm.
because that was the through line of what I wanted to study and what I loved studying. And of course, when you choose a major that isn't exactly lucrative, you always have those thoughts of, did I make a wrong choice?
Yeah.
But I realized not only did I love what I was studying, but I knew that if I just forced myself into any other major, A, I wouldn't have done as well. B, I would have hated my time there. And
Mm-hmm.
C, it wouldn't have really made a difference. Because even like after going out into the real world and searching for jobs, it was like, dang, maybe I should have done like business so I can get an easy time getting a job. But like, girl, could you imagine me as a business major? I would be sickening. Don't get me wrong, but because that's just who I am. But
Daquon said, I would be sickening, but
like I would, but it wouldn't have been me. So there have been plenty of times where I have thought, okay, maybe this was the wrong decision.
Mhm.
But I think that so often you have to just trust the process.
Yeah.
Over time, you will realize that even all of those doubts that I had in the past are gone. They don't matter because I did what I needed to do. And that's something you have to think about a lot in life.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, it was letting go of a friend that I had when I was in college. We were really close at one point, so close that we even considered living together.
Mhm.
She'd recently moved out on her own and she rented like a two-bedroom apartment. And we agreed that when I graduated a few months later, that I'd move into that second bedroom, and in those following months when my family had fallen on hard times, she and I went through a particularly rough patch in our friendship because when I needed her to be there for me emotionally, she didn't provide a space for me in the same way that I had for her in the past. Not to mention that in the time, she had also told me that she'd reconsidered me moving in with her and decided against it after we'd already made plans for me to make that happen. So it's safe to say that after that and the lack of, emotional support from her, I decided to end the friendship because I just felt like I was more invested in it than she was. Now, time went on. I moved out on my own, lived some life, and decided to reach back out to her. I thought that, when I thought back to our how our friendship ended, the words we exchanged, I thought that maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just, in a bad place at the time, and our friendship was, a casualty of that difficult time. So I got her phone number from one of my other friends and we called each other, apologized to one another. And I thought that maybe we could have, rekindled our friendship. But as we talked on the phone that night, it turned out that she hadn't changed in that long stretch of time that we were apart. But I did. I was not the same person I was when we were friends. Um, and we ended that conversation, with the false promises of, girl, we'll keep in touch. Girl, I'll call you tomorrow. Da, 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 da. But since that night, we haven't spoken to each other since. Even though at the time I thought that losing her as a friend was the wrong choice. It turned out that the situation I went through during that difficult time with my family just happened to also reveal who she actually was to me so that I could see that our friendship was actually a very unhealthy dynamic. The two of us not being friends turned out to be the best choice I could have made for our relationship. We had our time, and it came to an end. And just because she wasn't a good friend to me doesn't mean that she was a bad person. I just had to make peace with the fact that we just didn't fit into each other's lives anymore. And I had to be okay with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally get that. And I think thinking about friendships is so interesting in this conversation because you never realize how much friendships can change and people can change or stay the same.
Yeah.
I I remember specifically having this friend in college where, we at a time were like a dynamic duo. We would always eat together, we would always go out together, we would have all different types of fun, and it was like we were practically inseparable.
Mhm.
But then we had a moment where we had a falling out and we stopped talking to each other because of certain things that happened. I
Mhm.
won't get into it, but like things happen, and I had that idea of my in my mind of like, okay, was I taking this situation too seriously? Should I
Mhm.
just like forget it and move on and yada yada yada?
Yeah.
And I did that. And what happened was we ended up becoming friends again. And once again, we would be buddy buddy for a little bit, have another falling out, stop talking to each other. It just became this cycle and it got worse and worse and worse to
Yeah.
the point to where they were trying to turn my friends against me and make them pick sides and bring
Mm.
all different types of people into a situation that had nothing to do with them and just paint me out to be this bully and this mean person when in reality like that is not who I am. And so I finally made the decision to where it's like, okay, I can get over little petty dramas and stuff like that, but when you come for my character, when
Yeah.
you mischaracterize who I am as a person, that is when I draw the line. It is like no more. And frankly, after deciding that, my life has been so much more drama free in terms of the department.
There's a light in there's so
There's
much.
just I seen
I
a
can
light,
breathe.
and my life has just been so expanded. And but in reality, there is so many decisions that you have to make in life, and you always wonder if you made the right decision, but you go down the path that you're meant to go down. There is so many different life lessons. There are so many times when you needed to meet a certain people. I know I when I transferred to the high school I graduated to, I was like, maybe this ain't for me. Like I was like, I had this friend group that I was comfortable with. I had
Mhm.
like my role, had my squad XYZ. I knew how to do things pretty easy. It was, and then going to that school, there was some challenges. There was
Mhm.
a lot of people that like I didn't know, and so it was like, all right, so now I have to find a whole new friend group in the
Yeah.
middle of high school, and so many things like that. But I know that was the right decision because if I didn't go to that school, I wouldn't have met you. We wouldn't be doing this podcast. So it's like at
Everything happens for a reason. This is what
everything
I want to
happens for a
say.
reason. So it's like I said before,
Yeah.
sometimes you just have to trust the process and let life show you why you were right.
Exactly. Now, so many children grow up never knowing the full scope of what their culture has contributed to society and history. So it's time for a change. Let's take a pause, rewind, and remind the world just how we did that. In an article on Black Past, we learned that although many 21st century readers are aware of his work only through his introduction to Frederick Douglass's My Bondage and My Freedom, Dr. James McCune Smith was one of the most broadly accomplished Black intellectuals and activists in antebellum America. Born in New York on April 18th, 1813, to a mother who purchased her own freedom and a father who may have been a freed slave or a white merchant, Smith attended the African Free School in New York City, where at the age of 11, he was chosen to give an address to the Marquis de Lafayette in 1824. Upon graduation from the African Free School, James McCune Smith sought but was denied admission to several American colleges. He then managed to raise money to attend the University of Glasgow in Scotland, where, after completing his bachelor's and master's degrees, he completed a medical degree in 1837. Thus, he became, as far as can be determined, the first African American to be awarded a degree in medicine. After completing a medical internship in Paris, France, he returned to New York City where he opened a medical office and a pharmacy that attracted interracial clientele on West Broadway. While in Scotland, Smith joined the Glasgow Emancipation Society, an organization that helped to fund his education. After returning to New York City, Smith quickly emerged as a powerful anti slavery and anti racism organizer, orator, and writer. In 1863, he moved to Ohio to accept a position as a professor of anthropology at Wilberforce College. James McCune Smith died of heart disease at the age of 52 on November 17th, 1865. He was survived by a wife and 5 children. Come on, Black first.
We love a Black first.
And speaking of,
right? Also, in an article from Black Past, we learned that Simone Ariane Biles is an American artistic gymnast. She is a 3-time world all-around champion, 3-time world floor champion, 4-time U.S. national all-around champion, and a member of the gold medal winning American teams at the 2014 and 2015 World Artistic Gymnastics Championships. Biles is also a 2016 Olympic individual all-around vault and floor gold medalist. She was part of the gold medal winning team at the 2016 Summer Olympics in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and also won a bronze medal in the balance beam during those games. Biles began competing as a gymnast in 2007. In 2013, Biles was an all-around winner at the P&G Championships, and later that year, she became the first female African-American athlete to win gold all around in the World Gymnastics Championship.
Speaking of first, I'm sorry.
Period. We love a Black first. In 2014, Biles took the U.S. and world titles in the all-around competition, winning gold in the vault, floor exercise, balance beam, and all-around at the Secret U.S. Classic that same year. In 2015, Biles became the first female to win her 3rd consecutive world all-around title, giving her a record 10 gold medals in international competition. The following year, she earned a spot on the 2016 Olympic team with fellow gymnasts, calling themselves the Final Five. Biles led the team, winning 4 gold medals and 1 bronze medal in the Olympic Games in Rio. Biles won the 4 gold medals in team, all-around, vault, and floor exercise, and a bronze medal in the balance beam. With those medals, Biles joined only 3 other gymnasts who had won multiple gold medals in the Olympic Games. The many Olympic and World Championships medals won by 4'8", 104-pound 19-year-old Biles by the year 2016 have made her the most decorated gymnast in U.S. history.
Period, bitch. Period. Simone said, I am that girl. That's what
Right.
Beyonce based a song off of.
And she's still killing it.
She is still killing it. That's why I was like, speaking of Black First, Simone Biles,
Right.
Black First, baby. That right
Black
there.
women.
Black women, Black people, Daquon, Black people in general, bitch. We constantly rise in the fucking bar, bitch.
We
We
eat it
are
up every time.
girl. Now, as always, thank you all so much for watching, and keep the conversation going down in the comment box below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and if you are listening to us on our podcast, please rate and review on whatever platform you're using. You can also follow our podcast on Instagram and TikTok at the Melanin Margin for updates of new content.
And if you'd like to follow each of us, our handles are at Daquon MUE
and at Andre Talks It Out, baby.
Now we will see you all next time on the Melanin Margin, where our goal is always to bring the marginalized to the spotlights in any way we can. Goodbye now.